Nick Suttner, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thank you much for having me.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. We don't talk to people with your expertise and pedigree in the industry much, so it's a lot of...
talk to people without jobs very often.
You know what? Technically, I think that's true. I think Warren Spector, when we Skyped him in, he was technically out of a job at that point, but... Yeah,
I'm in good company.
What is your life looking like now? What are you up to?
Man, it's been weirdly busy, actually, since I left my job. I've been sort of visiting people in LA and Seattle, and have a few more trips planned coming up, going to Copenhagen next week. Sort of lots of things to have workish conversations, and just lots of like lunches and casual chats and Skyping with developers who are interested in some consulting help. So I'm still figuring out, especially what I want to be doing long term, but there's been no shortage of like awesome people to talk to, which is great. So
just kind of freelance consulting now. Is it to kind of enriching your soul? Is it to make some fat cash? What's the idea?
I mean, hopefully a little. No, I was going a little bit of both, but not. I don't think that's going to make that cash. More actually just to give me a sense of what I want to be doing and the type of people I want to be working with. And I haven't really meaningfully started yet. It's more having initial conversations of what may make sense for which things for me to get involved with and how. I just started helping out doing some editing and a little bit of writing for a cool indie game that's coming out next year,
right on.
Which has been great. Honestly, like I was doing it before. I was playing the game last night before I went to bed. And looking and thinking about some of the sections I wanted to help with some editing on, and went to bed feeling like I was excited to like wake up today to get to writing, which is like a feeling I haven't had in a long time of like going to sleep excited about work. And that's exactly the sort of thing I'm looking for and the sort of reason why I quit my job. So
because you're looking forward to staying up late at night, just staring at the ceiling, being excited.
Yep.
Well, I'm sure I told you this in person a couple times, but your origins back at OneUp. OneUp was just my religion back in the day. Like I've shaped my entire life around that website. And I'm wondering, just for you, when you look back at OneUp.com, that old game site, what stands out when you reflect on that with like a fine wine as time passes? What do you appreciate more about that place?
It's weird because I mean, it shaped my sort of thoughts about games and everything too before I worked there. Like I, listened to the podcast, and I may have told the story before where even before I worked there, when I visited San Francisco, I went and like stalked those guys going to lunch from their lobby, which was fun. And I was like, oh, there's like Garnet and Skip and all them.
For listeners, we don't encourage stalking in any aspect of the podcast, but that's very cool.
Especially not Game Informer.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I was just like a crazy fan, and then moved out here and ended up getting a job there, which was awesome. And yeah, looking back at it, I mean, I really do sort of miss it still. It really does feel like the most sort of maybe like seminal part of my career, of like the stepping stone. And I still, now I'll like meet developers in a totally different context, and they'll be like, oh, I recognize you. And I'll be like, oh, OneUp show. And they're like, oh yeah. So like, and I was only in a handful of episodes. So it really, I think, had an impact with people. And I still meet people from overseas who like watch the OneUp show every Friday. I really felt like a community sort of on the same page with something. And I still feel like it really did sort of predate the more like streaming culture and personality driven stuff that we see now, which is really interesting to think about.
The streaming
I still
thing.
feel like there's a great book there. Maybe I should spend my time off writing that.
I don't know what that audience is like, but yeah, I'm sure NeoGaf would love to read it, and I would love to read it if there's that
it's
community
them
out
and you
there.
and me.
Yeah. No, but I mean, just that crazy pedigree, I think it speaks a lot to the quality of OneUp and, EGM from that era as well, that after the implosion, the OneUpocalypse, like, basically everybody has had a huge impact on the game industry since. It's like, a supernova or something. It's just, it really speaks like, back in the day, all these different pieces that have had such a big impact on the game industry were coalesced into one office. Like, that's why that was so fantastic.
It's crazy to think about, and that just becomes more crazy over the years, and pretty quickly too. Like, I mean, even right now, right? Like Lou Smith, creative lead on Destiny, and Brian Intihart, creative lead on Spider-Man. Like some of the biggest games ever, basically. All started there, which is cool. I'd love to see someone make like a family tree and sort of where everything went, because I'm curious about that too. Because I always hear about new things too that people are doing that I didn't even know they were involved in.
Yeah, what part of the family would Phil Kohler belong to? Former Game Informer editor Phil Kohler.
He's our branches intertwined for a while and then like broke off a little bit, and now his broke off geographically. But yeah, we were sort of like the new leaves that sprouted and
that's very beautiful.
In our own directions.
The lovely little leaves. So talking about your time at PlayStation, I feel like you were there during a really interesting transition for the overall company. Is there a specific era within the overall era that you think about the most, or you think was most interesting within your time at Sony?
Well, I sort of came in on like the doldrums of PS3, which was sort of a tough time because I think like people had sort of been humbled a little bit, like people had been there for a long time, and I think obviously the company expected PS3 to be this instant massive hit, hence the price tag and all that. But yeah, so I came in at sort of a tougher time, and then um, and PSP was around as well, and I was just excited to be there as well. It seemed like sort of a different style of dream job about because at the time I was like a product evaluator, writing up and seeing all sorts of stuff super early and writing up feedback. And
all right, stop real quick. What's like the most exciting thing you saw super early?
That's a great question. Well, okay, it's funny. This probably is like not a good answer, but I'm a huge fan of the EDF series, Earth Defense Force.
Okay.
And the one that actually turned out to be not very good, the Western developed one, Insect Armageddon.
Yeah.
That was one where like we knew nothing about it. It wasn't like a blip on the radar, and then suddenly one day there was like a playable demo of it. And usually things like start very early from like a design doc sort of pitch, and then later there's like a playable build. But this was like playable build out of nowhere, which was like super exciting. I was a huge EDF fan, and I didn't know it would be bad at the time. And I was like, oh my god, like different Western developers, the first one in a while. It's like the next gen EDF, and that was an exciting moment that sort of turned out not to be that exciting.
Perfect. Not to derail the original question even more, but I want to dissect even what you said so far. Right?
Yeah.
So you say the overall company felt humbled. I'm just curious, what is that? What does that mean, humbled? Is it just a matter of like, I mean, think for a lot of gamers to think back of like, oh, I had a good time with my PS3. I think it sold well. Is it just a matter of the overall company? It's either breaking even or not. And if it's not, that just hurts morale through the entire company? Or is it just a matter of like the horse race? Or what
I think more just people? That PS2 was like such a sensation and like took over the world and everyone there was such a big part of it. And then PS3 came out and didn't do it, doing anything short of what they expected, I think. Never mind struggling a bit early on, I think was tough for people probably on morale and not being the top seller for a while. And eventually by the end of its life cycle, I think it was pretty like even with Xbox worldwide.
Yeah.
But definitely was a tougher road. And I think I got there in sort of the middle of that, and things started to improve and get better. And we got sort of the right management and stuff in as well. And then, you had asked about sort of the most exciting days. And I think those early PS4 days are really exciting, right? When we first got to find out about it. And loop devs in on early on, which was sort of the whole key to the whole indie-friendly thing for PlayStation, was really bringing devs in on a new platform way earlier than we'd ever done before. So actually getting them into the office, disclosing them on the hardware, getting them access to the hardware as soon as possible, that was critical. And that's where things like The Witness came from, is like, me talking to John. I still remember this moment casually standing in the streets of Culver City during Indiecade with John, and I was like, hey, if we were to have like a new cool thing to show you, would you want to come see it? And he's like, yeah, sure. And that conversation's like the start of us bringing him into showing that, giving him hardware, and then having him, X amount of months later on stage with the PS4 announcement to announce The Witness, which that was a big moment for me personally and for the platform, I think, just sort of this beacon of like, look, we are indie friendly. And now I think it's like, John's not necessarily the typical indie, and The Witness is a pretty high production value indie, as it were. But I think still at the time, especially, it was like, oh, consoles are interested in this. They want to talk to us. And so that was sort of the beginning of a lot of momentum that got people interested.
Yeah. Was it difficult to try and recruit indies during that era? Was it a lot of like weird cryptic talk of like, yeah, we have something exciting. You might want to come around 4:00, and a lot of like weird cutesy code like that?
It was having to be pretty cryptic until they were like on site. But I think people knew because it was sort of like the time, and maybe heard rumors and stuff. But it was, it was super still like very clandestine, and we were very selective in who we talked to.
Yeah.
But that was really fun starting to roll it out. And then once we had more hardware, just sending out dev kits everywhere and getting that great momentum. And before, just historically, a lot of indies didn't know how to talk to PlayStation. It was just this big monolithic company. They wouldn't know who to talk to. They didn't have much of a developer relations team. So we sort of turned that into a proactive thing, which was really important.
Yeah. So, I mean, just developer relations overall during that era. Can you just explain and walk viewers through what those discussions are like? I think there's still a lot of confusion about what that is. I mean, are you coming in with like different tiered options of like, all right, if you're full exclusive, we'll fund you in this way. If you want to be a timed exclusive, we'll fund you this way. Like, can you just break that down? How does that work?
I mean, the sort of mechanics of funding and exclusivity and stuff is not too exciting, I suppose. And honestly, more of it was just about coming more about just making sure, like, hey, do you need a dev kit? Here, have a dev kit. And even that we were pretty free with early on, especially in the early PS4 days. And so that's like step one, is just blanketing out hardware, and anything, anyone really who wants hardware and wants to make something for our platform, like, let's get them, headed down that road. And then for people too who wanted to talk about funding or marketing help or whatever, then it's like, okay, let's talk about, we have our pub fund program, which can help us fund some things. And we, sometimes have some co-marketing help we can provide. So, and yeah, with that, sometimes, especially with pub fund, it's like we like to think we're sort of helping things exist that aren't going to exist otherwise. And I think, we want them to debut on our platform. I feel like I'm speaking present tense now, even though this is like years in the past. And I think that's a big function of that too, which people don't think about when they get all up in arms about exclusivity, is that if something is debuting on your platform, like, that also gets your marketing team and your store team and like all these other internal parts of the company behind supporting the product, if that's the only place to buy it, like, day one. So games get a lot more support than they would get otherwise being full multi-platform launches, especially if you don't have like the big budgets of big publishers.
So what are you pushing? What are you trying to sell with these developers then to convince them that they should be fully exclusive? Are you saying like, hey, we'll really put you in the spotlight if you agree to some window? Sure.
Well, I guess first off, it was never fully exclusive with us. That maybe was more of a first party thing or second party, but we're dealing with self publishers on third party where I worked, and so it's honestly, it's really not. It's not a relationship of convincing. Like, I think I wouldn't have been comfortable doing that at all. It's more like, look, you're asking for this. That's cool. Here's some terms we can talk about. And that was always some reasonable timed exclusivity. We wanted to make sure that the devs were in a good place to like actually be able to finish the game the way they wanted to. So it was a pretty like good, relatively informal, friendly conversation for, like we wouldn't do it any other way, I guess, if we sort of had to talk someone in exclusivity. It's not something we would have done. We wanted a dev to be excited about doing it as well. I know I'm like dodging the question a little bit, but it was never sort of came from a place of like, this like strict business negotiation. It was like, cool, they want to have the biggest impact on our platform with their launch and they want to get their game funded. Okay, how can we do that? Well, if you get, you lead on our platform, and a lot of devs too, they sort of have to pick a platform because they don't have the bandwidth to focus on more than one thing for launch. So we would just give them good reasons to focus on our platform. And early on, that was an easy conversation too, because PS4 had a great launch. They saw what we were doing to support indies, not just on the store, on the digital store and on the platform, but like all over our social media and on the blog, and we talked about it on our podcast. And it was really this like holistic support that just came because we cared about the space. It didn't come because we were like contractually obligated.
Yeah. When you look back at the launch of the PS4, I mean, you kind of hinted a little bit that it's a lot of the indie support, but what do you attribute the success overall to? What were the key pillars in your mind of like, I'm so glad we did this and this and this?
Man, it was sort of a combination of, it was like a perfect storm, I feel like. And honestly, I attributed a lot of it to Adam Boyes, who was like the VP for a lot of the time I was there, and left right after I did, to go help run Iron Galaxy, which he's doing now. And Adam really was an amazing like force for good and a really inspiring leader. And even when he came in, he saw what we were doing with like Pub Fund, and we were, Brian Silva and myself and some other people were like off in a little corner, doing this stuff with Pub Fund and funding indies and doing some developer relations, but it was sort of like this weird moonlighting thing. And he saw the impact that we were having, even in a small way, and he helped champion and that inside the rest of the company to like get our devs on stage and do the whole do the whole like Indie 9 thing or whatever at E3, where we put like 9 indie devs on stage, and that also had a huge impact. And it's great having someone go to bat for you who's like pretty high up in the company. And Adam's a great internal champion as well. And across the board, though, not just for like our indie stuff, but everything else, and just the way we talk about the platform and work with developers. And I think things like we priced it right. PS4 like looks great. I'm not a huge fan of Pro, but PS4 looks great. So I think it was just sort of the right smart decisions. The RAM, all like the technical side of it, like devs seem to be pretty happy with. So
yeah, this is the overall thing that I'm trying to wrap my mind around, is how important is a strong outward facing personality and maybe even an internal manager, someone like Adam Boyes. How important is that to then filtering down to the point of average consumer going to the store and saying, I guess I'll get a PS4? Like, is it just because it's more inside baseball to think like, oh, Adam Boyes, you should really thank him? how important do you think having just a good leader in charge is for the success of an overall console at launch?
I think it's super important. But you know, it's a team, of course, too. It's a whole crew of people, and especially on the, you know, we were on the developer relations side, but on the publisher relations side, the points of contact for Activision, EA, and all of them, like that was really important too. And they helped spin up huge partnerships around Grand Theft Auto and other, like, you know, the biggest franchises out there, and Call of Duty, and pretty much all of them. And that was all done, you know, under the sort of guidance and support of Adam too. So it is a whole team, but leadership is super important. Just in feeling like inspired in the right way, and like you know, you're working for the right people and you're all in it together. I think as soon as you feel like it's you versus, you know, sort of you versus the world at a company, it's like that's you're not going to do your best work under that, you know, with that feeling.
Here's a weird thought. Is it kind of weird to really believe in the PlayStation cause? Like, I imagine everybody on that team did. And I'm imagining, this is what I imagine your life like, Nick, is you sit back at home and you like scroll through the PlayStation 4 library, and you just feel like this personal attachment to everything and want to cry looking at, you know, the crazy catalog you guys built up. To have that level of pride, but then also just seeing like console fanboys war online, and it's like, we should be on the same page, but I just don't like seeing that crap. Is it a weird sensation to look at like just the console wars?
It's a weird thing just generally with gaming right now. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, especially with like everything going on with the world right now, is like the gaming community is, you know, is pretty toxic a lot of the time. And I think and I was actually explaining this to people outside of games recently, but it's weird because the fans can be toxic in some ways, but developers are actually very supportive of each other and help each other a lot, and have, you know, great, you know, sort of help each other with business and have great conversations. And, it's this weird thing where it's almost like the business side of the industry is like in it together and trying to figure it out. And the audience doesn't always support them in that. And it's a difficult place right now. So I feel like it's the gaming audience needs to mature. And that also is critical for the mainstream audience to recognize gaming as something special and not just this like, you know, childish, dismissive hobby. And I think that's something where, you know, we're not quite there yet with sort of the respect that gaming gets in mainstream culture. And I think, unfortunately, it's because of like who we are as gamers right now. I think we need to like do some growing up. I think the games are there and the creators are there and the artists are there, but there's these other weird two sides of it that need to come together more.
It's one of those things like, hey, not everybody. A lot of fantastic people in the gaming community.
No,
but,
absolutely.
But you just go to
obviously generalizing, but but it's also it's my whole, you know, circle of friends and who I talk with every day, and there's a lot of great people. It's my whole like life basically is the gaming community on the one hand, but on the other hand too, it can be a tough place.
Yeah. I think if you know, you're paying attention to the launch of the PS4 and launch of Xbox One and whatnot, and you see, I think you guys did an amazing job at just that public image of having, you know, indies out on stage early. I mean, just simple stuff like the classic E3 video of Adam Boyes handing a game, like that's how you share games on PS4 and stuff. And I'm trying to figure out like the perception versus the reality of what it's like inside Sony, because it's easy from the outside if you're paying attention, looking at it, just be like, oh, this seems awesome. They're all just talking about how great indie devs are, and Shoes just high-fiving developers and saying, yeah, games rock. Bloodborne looks sweet. What don't we know or appreciate about the inside of Sony? What's the perception versus reality gap that people might have?
That's a good question. These are all good questions, Ben. Jeez.
Thank you.
I mean, there's not as much of a gap as you might think, which I guess is a nice, it's the positive answer, but it's true. Like at the time, I think in the heyday of all this, I think with those moments with like Shu and Adam and all them, like it really was sort of that friendly and that casual in a lot of ways. And, you know, some of it had to be a little bit calculated and planned and everything, but stuff like that, I think came out pretty last minute, like the game sharing video. And they figured they'd do it. And there's just the spirit of like, oh yeah, let's do it. Like, sort of like we've got nothing to lose. Whether you're on the bottom or on the top, it's like, especially if you're in one of those both places, it's like, yeah, you got nothing to lose. Let's go for it. Let's try this new thing that feels sort of like a little cheeky. I'm trying to think of things like the sort of the more hardships of it. I mean, it's just that we had great momentum and we were finding success on a lot of fronts, whether it's the, you know, big AAA stuff or on the indie side, both internally and for developers. And when that's happening, it's like, you start to gain a lot of trust, whether it's someone like me or it's someone like Adam, and you sort of are able to keep doing this stuff and actually get the company's support on your crazy ideas and put budget behind them and pulling them off. There wasn't a huge disparity between sort of and that's something actually too I appreciate about Sony, you know, even more looking back at it, is like it's always sort of like chaos just because it's busy, and then the external face you put on is very cleaned up and looks great, and it's not bad chaos, it's just chaos. I feel like that's every big company, especially as you're like working up to like deadline based events. And that's something now too, where it's like, being on the outside now, I can see it's like the outside face that Sony puts on is very buttoned up and is great. But it's like, I'm sure there's chaos brawling inside because that's everywhere. But it makes me appreciate it when you see it just from the outside and you're like, oh yeah, it actually does put on a good face, and red games are coming out and you don't hear about the tough times. And but the tough times are more just working hard to like, make sure developers have a good experience. There's been some stories recently and around E3 earlier this year about like Sony being less indie friendly and all that. And it bums me out to see, because the reality is there's still like a huge team there. There's still 12 plus people or something on the developer relations team who care a ton and are doing a great job. So I think perception is important too, and I think with Adam gone, that's a bit tougher. But there's people like Gio and John Drake and Sean Benson now there, and just a lot of great people there who still really care about the stuff and are vocal about it. But there's been now it's like VR is a big thing to focus on, which is important too, and that's where you're seeing the company promote more of the indie content like at E3, and I assume that will continue. So. It's a bummer, but I think it's more like a perception issue than a reality thing.
Yeah. Here's a question that's way too simple, but is there one kind of lesson that you learned overall from your days at Sony? One like key takeaway, maybe even like the most surprising thing that you learned along the way?
I guess a key takeaway actually just sort of general ways I think about jobs I've had. And I honestly don't know if this is something I like read somewhere else one day or made up, but I think about it a lot. Sort of like a mantra though, is like, I think it's really important, like caring about your work more than your job is an important distinction. And by that, I mean, actually caring about what you're doing and the impact you're having with what you're doing, and caring about that more than, advancing your career or just sort of having something stable where you don't want to rock the boat. Like, I think everyone I've seen succeed in corporate environments especially hasn't been afraid to sort of like speak up and be passionate about things. And I think if you care more about just like having a job than actually the work you're doing, and obviously that's important in jobs for some people, which I'm not judgmental of, but I think at least for me in the gaming industry, it's like that's what is going to tend to push you forward and bring you satisfaction. Really is about caring about your work and not worrying about it. Like, if you're asking a stupid or tough question in like a meeting, an all hands meeting, I think that's important. And if you're not asking it because you're worried about your job, it's like that's going to be sort of a self-fulfilling thing. So I think really caring about the work you're doing is that's been important to me, and that's sort of been my professional mantra of some sort.
That's interesting. Just being externally focused compared to internally.
Yeah, just sort of not. Again, some people, having a job is like priority number one, but I don't have a job right now, so who am I to talk? But yeah, I think when you care about sort of your, where you are on the corporate ladder and all that, and sort of, a lot of these companies have like bonus incentives, and when hitting your bonus is your only incentive, or is the thing you are sort of motivates you the most, I don't think that's really going to make you the best employee ultimately. It sort of backfires for everybody.
Yeah. Well, speaking of jobs, do you have quick thoughts on Andrew House stepping down?
Oh, it's funny. Actually, I read that right before I went to bed a few nights ago, and then I had a dream about it that night.
He flew in through the window.
Yeah. Andy the Sandman. No, and in the dream he was like super pleasant as well. And honestly, he's great. Like, I think he had a really positive impact on the company for the decades basically. And he was in all of my interactions. He was always like really kind to me and really supportive. He knew my name, which sounds silly, but like that's when he's like, X levels exponentially removed from me and higher. It's like that means a lot too, when people actually know who you are and they care. And it was pretty special getting to hang out with him like at PSX 2 years ago when I was like on stage with Sid Schumann announcing some stuff that was sort of a career highlight for me. And things like that, where we would like do sort of the press conference stuff, like hanging out with Andy backstage a bit was like a thrill, because he's then going to go out and he's going to give the real, drop the real bombs. But he was always just a really like sweet guy. Really cared about what we were doing in the indie space. Like, it didn't feel like he was disconnected or anything, or didn't have visibility on it. Like, he really did, and he cared. and a lot of people there respected him a lot. So
That seems like
it's a bummer to see. I don't really know the internal politics of it at this point, but yeah, I hope he's going to go do more awesome things when he leaves.
Yeah, but in theory, the replacement, I mean, could have a big shift on
Sure.
the overall team within Sony. It's a crazy deal. Real quick, Last Guardian. Do you feel like it's got its due? I know you're a big Team Eco fan. I feel like it came and went so quickly, and people were like, "Oh, Eco is amazing," or "Trico's amazing." All right, moving on.
Yeah, I guess maybe because I like lurk in Last Guardian threads and stuff, but I also feel like I also see people just having had a great reaction. It was their game of the year and was everything they wanted it to be. So I think as long as there was like some contingent felt that too, I think it like did its job. Like it was always just like all of his games. It's always going to be a bit of a divisive thing, and he makes choices that not everyone would choose of. Like prioritizing certain animations over control responsiveness and just basic stuff that I think is a choice, but it's a choice that's going to turn off a lot of people. So I think though that it'll be curious to see sort of in the record books or just like in the annals of history how people think about the game. I think especially considering it's like Duke Nukem Forever style. Run up, like it definitely wasn't that. Like it was great that it turned out to be something that some people cared about a lot, and most people actually still play it. And obviously, it was like a real game. It wasn't like a cobbled together thing that barely came out. It was like, oh, actually, this is like a real beautiful thing. And people have frustrations with it that are all understandable. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a fan.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. I mean, just visiting Game Studios since it came out, I'm kind of surprised that no one's within cover story trips, and why the hell would they bring this up, I guess. But I'm surprised no one has referenced Trico as just one of the most amazing creations. I think it's going to stand the test of time for at least like 10 years as like the pinnacle of like a character just emoting, and you can connect with it so well. The animation is absurd.
Yeah, well, that's a weird thing about it. Like with Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, and I wrote about this in my book. If I can hawk my book.
Here we go.
Shadow of the Colossus by Nick Suttner in the Boss Fight book series.
It's very good.
I also read a Last Guardian book. I don't know if you knew that, but
I haven't read that one yet. What's that one like?
So there's this publisher called Future Press who make like the really nice high-end strategy guides for like Dark Souls and stuff.
Yeah.
And they put out a book called The Last Guardian: An Extraordinary Journey, which is sort of like a coffee table art book, like behind the scenes companion thing, which is like super nice. I have it around here somewhere. So anyway, I did like 85% of the writing for that.
Oh, cool.
But anyway, what I was going to say is before I hawk my book, that Eco and Shadow took these really interesting divergent paths where like Eco was super influential, and you can easily see like, oh, look at The Last of Us. Like, look at every game where you have a companion. Look at all these things that are about like building this bond with another character, and it sort of all goes back to Eco. And that's easy to see the influence. But Shadow, even though I think for me it was like the more special game, and for a lot of people, it went down this weird path that no one else really like followed. Like it was just a really weird, specific game that's hard to recreate. And even I think now, at best, there's games where you're like climbing up a giant. And you're like, oh, this feels a tiny bit like Shadow of the Colossus. Or like moments in Journey where you're like the feeling of awe that you're getting. You're like, oh, that reminds me a little bit of Shadow. And I think Last Guardian, though, is sort of more down that path where it's a very specific thing that is very difficult, too. And just the getting sort of the AI mixed with animation, mixed with the collision detection of Trico is just this ridiculous task that I think no one, like you said, it's going to be 10 years before someone else even really tries to do that. So I think it's going down the Shadow path where it's like maybe, I don't know if it's a dead end in a sense, but it's a place that's so difficult and clearly time consuming, that it just lives over in this weird area and doesn't sort of live amongst the stream of influences like Ego.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What do you think about Blue Point's remake of Shadow?
Oh, I'm really curious to see it. I think the PS3 remaster, which they did, is sort of the perfect version of it. It looks great. It still holds up, and it has all the original quirks intact, which I think is important. So yeah, I mean, this one visually looks great. I love some of like the latest trailer I think showed like the second Colossus like bursting through the rock wall, and I was like, oh, that rock wall looks like super nice destruction. So there's little improvements like that.
Yeah.
I hope they don't like smooth it out in a sense. Like I think the dealing with some of the control, quirks and eccentricities, we'll call them. I think that's like part of the nature of the game, and it goes part and parcel with it. I guess maybe if that's what it takes for more people to try it, maybe that is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I hope at least if that's the case, then you sort of get to try it both ways. I have no idea what they're doing with it, but I'm excited for more people to enjoy it. I just hope that they're able to sort of see the the beauty and all of that stuff that everyone else was able to see years ago.
Yeah, it'd be fun to talk to those guys at some point about that. Real
Yeah.
quick, I know you have to get going.
No, that's fine.
Your time at Oculus, I think it's a fascinating place in the industry right now. Just overall, does it feel more like late PS3 or early PS4 within that office?
Pretty different from either, actually.
Okay.
Because it's so much spending time thinking about the future, both in it's a very future focused company. It's a very like hardware focused company, I think. And those are things that I don't, like a space I don't tend to live in. For me, it's more like, oh, what cool games are coming out next week, or next month or whatever. So it's for me, I guess it's a bit shorter term, even if some games take a couple of years to brew. And even though we were just talking about Last Guardian, it's a place where and everyone's like an engineer there. Just like the culture is pretty different, and they're doing great things and thinking years down the line and putting untold like money and resources towards what is VR going to be in some number of years, or AR, or all of it. And it's just this very it's really cool, and it's cool to hear little like bits of it when you're there. But for me, it was I was a bit disconnected with that side of it. I was more on the content team of like, cool, what Red games are coming out, what developers should we be talking to. So in that sense, it felt more like sort of just the everyday at PlayStation. But that said, I mean, VR is a super interesting space, and I think there's a interesting balance right now of you can be a little bit riskier. I think some devs already are falling into like, oh, if we're going to make a horror game or we're going to make a nice wave shooter, it's like we're going to reach at least some critical mass of audience, which is important because it is risky. But you can also afford to make something a little bit weirder, and it will feel even more new. And I think, at least when I was there, that's the sort of stuff I was looking for. It's like, okay, what game are you a little worried about making because you're not sure if it's going to find its audience? Like, let me help you with some funding or some support or whatever.
Are you feeling optimistic about years down the road, those games are going to see the light of day, the bigger projects that are really reworking the basics?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm really like bullish on VR overall. I think it is going to be like hopefully the optimistic version of like the WALL-E future where we're like all sitting in headsets. I think that's sort of an inevitability at some point, or at least it becomes part of our daily routine. I don't know that how big gaming will be a part of that. I think it's going to be more about like travel and education and all this other stuff is what's going to break VR into the mainstream.
Yeah.
But in the short term, I think it is important to keep devs successful and help them in this space. And I think game developers are the people who are going to be building a lot of those other experiences of outside of games too down the road. So it's important to again help them and not just be a monolithic, unapproachable company and be like a proactive developer relations team that is like, oh cool, you're doing something cool in VR. Let me give you hardware. Let me give you support. Let me like help you be successful in this space until the critical mass becomes so of hardware sales that you don't need my help.
Yeah, I feel like there's an interesting disconnect. We had Jason Rubin on the podcast last year, and even in that discussion, he was saying, like, look, VR isn't going to explode and take off this year in 2016. It's not going to explode and take off next year. Like, we're thinking years ahead. But the biggest VR champions amongst the community are saying, like, oh, the future's here. The future's right now. Like, they're trying to claim success early, which then leads to the gut reaction of everyone saying, oh, well, clearly it's a failure right now.
Sure,
but everyone within the studio, including Rubin, they still maintain that just they're looking at the horizon. They're not looking at the successes and failures right now.
I mean, I guess, thinking more like for devs, I mean, there are, a good many devs who have made money in VR and continuing to make money and are able to make their next game. And that's really the goal. I don't think anyone is expecting like massive sales at the moment. And some people get there, but that's still sort of, only the top of the charts, as it were. So I think VR as a medium is successful right now. I mean, I think the experiences you can build and it sort of finally like come to pass that it just is great and VR is great, and now it's a matter of building content. But yeah, the market's still catching up. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't feel like it's years off. Or maybe it's a couple years off. I don't know. But I think it's just a matter of the right chemistry of the right piece of hardware at the right price. I don't know if that's VR or AR or what, but like that there's going to be something that gives everyone a reason to adopt it, or maybe it's a piece of software, but it's something that's going to get it out there. And at that point, also it becomes really exciting when the hardware is more ubiquitous and when people have more of an audience to speak to, and then everyone else can dive in right now. Because right now it's sort of like the people taking the risk, the forebears of VR, and there's also, I think, going to be an inevitable like gold rush on the space, just as there was on iOS and other like fledgling platforms. So I think the people right now who are becoming VR experts are going to be able to reap those rewards down the line when that does happen. But when that happens, it's pretty unpredictable. So I don't blame people for holding back for now either.
Like Camouflage, who you're working with now, right? Listen to the Camouflage radio.
Yeah. They're doing some super rad stuff in VR.
Oh, that's awesome.
I really wish I could talk about it, but
someday.
Stay tuned for them.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Anything else you're dying to talk about? Any other words of wisdom you want to impart on our audience before you take off?
Oh man, no! Thanks a lot for having me. This is a big thrill. Like podcasting at PlayStation and elsewhere was one of my favorite parts of it, and I haven't gotten to do it for a while, so it's exciting to be back on the wagon in a small capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.